think we will begin. Being respectful of all of us who are here on time, and I know everyone has a busy schedule. So again, good morning for those of our friends joining us from California. Good afternoon to you, friends, supporters, and guests of our program today. I am Judith Shamir, the chair of programming on Na'amat USA National Board. It is my privilege to welcome you to our Jews of all Hues and Views panel discussion. This was very much awaited for, and it was a process to get here, but here we are, and I'm so happy that we are all here now. Special welcome to our distinguished guests, Rabbi Enid Lader of Beth Israel, the Westside Temple in Cleveland, Ohio, Rabbi Tiferet Berenbaum from Temple Beth Zion in Brookline, Massachusetts, and Rabbi Deborah Mckenzie of the Sim Shalom online synagogue. Before we begin, I would like to extend our appreciation to all of you for your ongoing support of Na'amat's work. Na'amat USA, in partnership with Na'amat Israel, supports educational and social service projects throughout Israel, including the largest network of daycare centers, multi-purpose centers for children traumatized by terrorism or violence at home, technological high schools for teen at risk, legal services, centers for prevention and treatment of domestic violence, shelter for abused women, to name just a few. Your generosity makes a significant contribution to the welfare of families in Israel. At this time, I would like to call on Linda Schomburg, Na'amat National Board Recording Secretary, to introduce Rabbi Lader, the moderator of the panel discussion.
Greetings. Rabbi Enid Lader and her husband Harry have lived in Lakewood for over 35 years and are longtime members of Beth Israel, the West Temple. With a background in music therapy and music education, Rabbi Enid went for a graduate degree in Judaic Studies at the Cleveland College of Jewish Studies. Originally serving as the Director of Congregational Education for Beth Israel, the West Temple, for 20 years, she then became the lay spiritual leader and educator for Knesset Israel Temple in Worcester, Ohio. It was during this time that she started her rabbinic studies. In 2010, Rabbi Enid was ordained from the Academy for Jewish Religion in New York and completed her work in Worcester in 2012. She began her position as the rabbi at Beth Israel, the West Temple, in August 2012. Rabbi Enid is very active in interfaith programming in the Cleveland area.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you, Yehudit, for inviting me to serve as the moderator for our program today. It's a wonderful honor for me to get to meet Rabbi Deborah and Rabbi Tiferet and engage them with questions. I believe that our program for today, I will introduce our speakers. Each one of you rabbis will have the opportunity to speak for a little bit, and then I have a wonderful list of questions, and I understand that Randy is manning the chat box, and as our speakers share their wise words, if you have questions, please write your questions in the chat. Randy will call them and share them with me or share them with our speakers, and we'll move forward in our program. And then at the end of our discussion, I will invite each of our speakers to make a concluding statement, and then I believe it's Selma who will wrap up our program for today. So Rabbi Tiferet Berenbaum is the Director of Congregational Learning and Programming at Temple Beth Zion in Brookline, Massachusetts. She received rabbinic ordination as well as a Master's of Jewish Education from Hebrew College in Newton, Massachusetts, and is currently pursuing a doctorate, God bless you, in educational leadership at Lesley University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Rabbi Tiferet formerly served as Senior Rabbi and Education Director at congregations in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Mount Holly, New Jersey. She is a 2021 Covenant Foundation Pomegranate Prize recipient in recognition of her leadership in Jewish education. Throughout her career, Rabbi Tiferet has had a front seat at the intersection of race, gender, and religion, giving her valuable insights into how different groups of people view the world and their role in it. As she teaches, and I quote, "None of us can control what happens in the world, but we each have the power to control how we respond. We need to access our spiritual core and fearlessly acknowledge our dark places, both as individuals and as a society, in order to shift what we see going on around us. The shadows serve to remind us that there is also light." And Rabbi Deborah Mckenzie is the founder and rabbi of the Torah Inspiration and Study Chavruta, through which she leads a weekly Torah study and leads a session on Jewish mysticism. In addition to officiating life cycle events, she also serves as one of 5 rabbis at Congregation Sim Shalom, who lead and live stream virtual Ma'ariv or evening services Monday through Friday. It is said that she adds a special kavanah and soulful flair to traditional services. She strives to create a safe and sacred space and community that includes her humbling closing message for congregants: "Be a blessing and shine your light." And I quote, "Shine your light" is her signature phrase. A Central New York native, Rabbi Deborah currently resides in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. Raised in a strongly observant Jewish home, her family served as the intersection of the African American, Jewish, Catholic, and Christian communities. She credits her strong Jewish foundation, including love of Torah, family, and tikkun olam, to the dedication of her trailblazing parents. Rabbi Deborah admits that her ability to do public speaking events are based on some of her earliest memories of growing up that included daily Shachrit and Ma'ariv services, morning and evening services, weekly Torah study sessions, Hebrew lessons, and discussions on the weekly Haftorah portion, all in their Syracuse, New York home. Nevertheless, it is in living at the intersection of such diverse and varied perspectives that multiple bridges in diversity were established that continue to shape and strengthen her faith and her spirituality. Additionally, Rabbi Deborah holds several roles and oversees a number of programs and projects. So we heard about her spiritual side, and now we hear about her scientific side. She's the Senior Director for Standards and Official Methods at AOAC International, where she oversees the development of global analytical standards and the adoption of methodology used for food safety and public health purposes. As a subject matter expert, she is also the administrator of U.S. Technical Advisory Group to the Food Products Technical Committee of the International Standards Organization. She is also a practitioner of practical Reiki. I would think that that would be very helpful in all the different kinds of work that you do. While all of these roles seem unrelated to her service as a rabbi, elements of these find their way into her rabbinate. Her teachings foster an intuitive approach to learning Torah and the wisdom of the sages that facilitates relevance in 21st century living across all ages. Rabbi Deborah holds a Master of Science in Chemistry and a certificate in Practical Reiki Level 3. In 2015, after many years serving as a lay leader, she honored her father's memory when she was ordained through the Jewish Spiritual Leaders Institute, the Rabbinical Seminary of Congregation Sim Shalom, a global online-based synagogue and home of Jewish Universalism. We are so pleased that Rabbi Tiferet and Rabbi Deborah are with us this afternoon, sharing their light. So Rabbi Tiferet, how about if we begin with you for a short statement?
Sure. Hello. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this forum. It's really wonderful. I am so happy to be sharing this space with you, Rabbi Enid, and getting to hear such wonderful things about Rabbi Deborah. Like, wow. So I'm just looking forward to these next, what do we have, 45 minutes of conversation and questions and, just getting to know each other's stories a little bit more.
Thank you. And Rabbi Deborah?
It is also so much an honor for me to be here with all of you, and thank you so much, Rabbi Enid, and you, Rabbi Tiferet. I am looking forward to these discussions because I remember a time when these discussions did not happen and would not happen. And so to bring and have this discussion in the forefront, and especially as it relates to our our roles as women, Jews of color, and just the impact of how our Jewish community overall has evolved. It's amazing, and so I am truly grateful for this honor. I also would like to thank Ellen Friedman, who's on. Hello, Ellen, because it is through Ellen that I was able to, that Melanie actually made contact with me. So I would be remiss not to acknowledge my dear friend. So thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you both, rabbis. So Rabbi Deborah, let's start with you. And if you could share perhaps your Jewish journey and what it meant in as you grew up.
I honestly did not know anything differently. I grew up in a very Jewish observant household, in an African American community, the South Side of Syracuse. It was, African American, Protestant, a lot of Methodist, Episcopalian, Baptist, Pentecostal, and even Catholic. Members of those faiths were part of the community, very active in the community. So our family kind of stood out as that single family, but because we had the most kids, we were the house everybody wanted to come play in. So we actually, it just kind of happened that everyone, at least in our block, kind of gravitated to our ability to, have fun, if you will. On Shabbat, when everything began to shut down, they knew we weren't going to come outside to play on Shabbat. So they would really wait until after Havdalah was done. Like they could hear us having Havdalah services. And then, it was like, all right, they can come outside now. So it was very fun. But one of the things that, in our household, it was very family based. Our engagement with the Jewish community broadly didn't begin until I was in about 5th grade. And that's when I was allowed to go to day school. Prior to that, everything really existed in our home. My father taught us Hebrew. My mother made sure that we observed all the kashrut and knew all of the different laws pertaining to halacha that were involved in the house and so forth. So we didn't have that overall support in that way, but at the same time, it established a solid foundation. Along with that, there are members of my extended family who are not Jewish, and that has its own, part of the broader story of my family. But with that, we were able to engage with many other faiths and participate. After day school, my parents sent us all to Catholic school, Catholic private school. In fact, my high school was known as the convent school. So, and to be able to engage in that sense really strengthened, I think, strengthened what I consider to be my Judaism or my expression of Judaism. Having to take religion, having to go to mass, it allowed that interfaith experience of just being able to understand and being able to engage with others outside of the shul we had in my house, outside of outside of the membership within the broader Jewish community. And it just really began to open doors, not only for me, but for those of the other faiths as well. My Catholic high school had never had Jewish girls as students before. So it was new for them as well. And go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to ask, so you mentioned that the shul of your home. So were you able to, were there other Jewish families either in the neighborhood or I have a feeling there's a really interesting story about your parents here. And maybe if you could share that, kind of like a short Reader's Digest version, that might help us.
My parents actually grew up in Mims, Florida. I actually just returned from there today. And, back in their time, when they were growing up, they couldn't openly practice.
Mm.
So the women, if they had to practice a faith, they had to go to church. The men could get away with not doing anything. And that was fine. Not that they could openly practice anything else, but if they didn't go to church, that was fine. And what would happen is that the men would actually go into the orange groves. And this is where history got passed down. And then at dinners and so forth, the discussions would transpire and the history would pass down orally regarding where we came from, the prayers, the various things that we're supposed to do and not do. They actually had their own form of a shochet who would do the slaughtering of animals and so forth, because they did grow livestock. My grandparents grew livestock. And so there were lots of different elements where they could express and it was commonly accepted, that's fine. Where it wasn't, they had to, as a way of survival, they had to find other means. My parents both at separate times left MEMS, and as many of my family and others did, just out of being able to find work and so forth. And so when they met in Syracuse again, and the shorter version, when they met up in Syracuse, that's when they married and decided that they were going to raise a Jewish family. No question.
And how many siblings do you have?
I had 7, 2 older brothers, 4 younger sisters, and my oldest brother's deceased now, but so there are 6 of us left. And my niece is actually leaving next month for Israel to have her bat mitzvah. So the tradition carries on.
Right. So, and who in your family were the first practicing Jews? Did it start with your parents, or did they receive the tradition before them?
My great grandparents were actually were the ones passing down tradition. Mm-hmm. And it came from their parents. So
great. Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much. So, Rabbi Tiferet, how about your Jewish journey? I think it might look a little different.
Yeah, my Jewish journey, I grew up in Brookline, Massachusetts, and Brookline's a very Jewish place for people who are unfamiliar. I always joke, it's super Jewish. It's called Baruchline. And that's not mine. Yeah, I knew a lot of Jewish people going through school, and when I got to high school, it was like pretty predominantly Jewish. Hold on one second, excuse me.
Sprinkle them into the oil. Some of them will stick together. That's okay. Want to get them into the oil.
Sorry, Encanto just started playing very loudly in the background. Um, so um, I discovered Judaism, ironically, at Catholic school. Um, when I had we had a Seder, which now I'm like, oh, that's cultural appropriation. We wouldn't do those kinds of things now. But like my Catholic teacher threw us a Seder, and it was really fascinating. And I was like, this is great. Look, like we get to ask questions. This is wonderful because like it totally goes against the grain of Catholic school, where like this, you're just fed theology, and that's what you're supposed to believe. And then later on, I discovered, I guess I was in fifth grade, I had the Seder. Sixth grade, we started having formal religious classes. And I had my first religion textbook, really. And like that was my first introduction to Midrash, although like I didn't know that that's what it was, and text study. And I just took that and ran. And I was the only person who was like actually reading the textbook, and like I highlighted in it, I wrote notes in it. I was like, this is great. This is what we're here for. And so I just started studying that book really deeply. I remember having, my parents are Southern Baptist, and I remember one Christmas, they wanted to just like offer gifts, and I came downstairs. I had prepared a sermon to give them, before opening the gifts. And my mother's just like, oh my God. But they listened. It was like 10 minutes. It was like high holiday length, for giving these before, opening the presents. So I started this spiritual journey like when I was 11, and really just having a conversation with God. I had like my, revelation moment. I had a Sinai moment when I was also 11. And, it was so interesting because later on, later on as we were starting to talk about, Jesus and Jesus's role in Christianity and all this, and like, that like didn't make sense to me. Like I already had this very deep connection with God, this very strong prayer life. And I was like, wait, I don't understand what, like, I just didn't understand what that was, what that would add to the religious life that I was already building that I didn't have. But that was a question, and questions weren't answered, so I just, went along with it. And then, I started practicing on my own spiritually, started keeping the Sabbath on Saturday. I did not know at this point about Judaism, really. I just, felt in my soul that Shabbat should be on, that the Sabbath should be on Saturday. That's what made sense to my mind. And I started reading the Torah from the beginning, and just like sticking with the beginning, and like all of these things that I like didn't know were Jewish, but like these were the things that like really spoke to me. So when I got to college and went to Hillel for the first time, I was like, oh my God, these people are doing all this stuff that I've been doing for the last, like that I already do. So I thought that was really cool. And I called my mom and I was like, Mom, I think I'm Jewish. And she's like, yes, we know. And I was like, oh, parents know before kids sometimes, usually. So then I started reading and digesting a lot of literature, because that's, I'm really a bookish person, and like deep wanting to know and understand. And so then I took the formal conversion classes through the conservative movement. And it's so funny because when I took those classes, like I could have taught those classes. They were so basic, and I had already like done a very deep dive into Judaism and Jewish living and life and history, etc. So I talked to one of the teacher of the class, and she was like, well, if you want to teach these classes, you should probably go off and be a rabbi. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess that's something I'll want to do. And my other rabbi had said the same thing. So that's another huge part of my Jewish journey. And going to rabbinical school was just a part of like my deep desire to know and to understand and to absorb tradition. So it was a surprise at the end when they were like, now you have to go out and like be a rabbi. It's like, oh my God. So yeah, that's my Jewish journey so
Go
far.
and learn and go and do.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So, so it sounds like your family was supportive of your journey and of your occupation.
Oh yeah, my mom was always there for everything through, like she's at every, event in general. Like she volunteered in my kindergarten classroom, like she was there for everything. So this was just another thing for her to show up for. She was at my mikvah, she came to, when I would do things at the synagogue, she would come to the synagogue. So yeah, she's always been very supportive, and it took her a while, interestingly, to to understand this journey, because early on she would say things like, well, you just want to be white, and I didn't really understand what that meant, because I was, growing up in a white world. I didn't have a racialized lens like she did, coming from South Jersey, and her own stories of oppression, and her and my father and all the stuff that they've had to deal with in their lives. I didn't have any of that, so I didn't even understand, why I was getting that pushback. But now that I'm like deep in anti-oppression work within the Jewish community, I'm like, oh, that's where that was coming from my mom. But, besides all of that, she was always supportive, completely supportive. And I know that that's really special, because not everyone has that.
For sure, for sure. So let's talk about, well, let me let you talk about what it means to be women of color and rabbis and women. Okay, all that's three, right? Three things that are intersecting. And Deborah, let's start with you. And please unmute. Thank you.
I was thinking about this and trying to see how best to articulate it, because I don't know any different. I don't have a comparison. I know that as a woman, there are certain experiences that impact me personally, as well as that I care about and am involved in, both as a woman of color, and as well as a rabbi. But it's like, yes, each of those, being African American, being Jewish, and being a rabbi, and being a woman, actually. It's like, all right, so this is the package I've been handled. This is the deck I have to work with. And so I'm not sure that I know any different. So for me, I feel fine. That may sound odd, given that all of those have packages of challenges that come with them. But, it's like, all right, I've designed to be able to consider the challenges that come with each of those individually, as well as any combination. And then somewhere along the line, I managed to throw in a few other, throw in a few other things to add to that mix, like becoming a scientist. So you'd add that to it. I'm not exactly the tallest person either, so you add that to it. So it really comes down to, I'm comfortable in my space, recognizing that, yes, as an African American Jew, as an African American rabbi, as a female African American rabbi, that there are many intersections. There are lots of things that I consider plain wrong. There are lots of things that I see that are, resonate with me immediately. And there are a number of things that, this is where together, this is where I can help serve potentially as a bridge, or where we can come together and work on improving, work on the evolution that will better impact us.
Great. Thank you. Tiferet, Rabbi Tiferet.
Can you please rephrase the question? I'm struggling with.
Sure.
And before you answer, Rabbi
Yes.
Deborah, and before the question is restated, could you move just a little closer to your mic or see if you can adjust? Someone's requesting louder when you speak, if it's possible. Thank you.
Sure.
Oh.
No, not right now, sweet. Talia.
We don't talk about Bruno.
I know.
Right.
Let me switch to
right.
microphone. Oh, let me try.
Is this better?
Yes, much better.
Oh, okay.
Much better.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay. Great.
Great.
It was
Very good. Okay, we'll
right,
start
great.
over.
Okay.
Okay. So the question is, when you there's an intersection of different parts of who you are, a woman of color, a rabbi, and there's three: woman, African American, and rabbi. How do those areas come to intersect for you? And I guess maybe I'll just move forward in asking, as you see that, what are the challenges that you face or have faced, or what are things that you've noticed about people's responses to you? And are there things that we could do better? Okay.
Oh, wow. I think I want to echo what Rabbi Deborah said. Like, I don't know anything else. Like, this is just, the world that I inhabit. And, there are times when I am feeling biased. Yes, I'm doing night Alia. Okay, it's not time for pajamas yet, sweetie. There are times when I'm feeling biased, and I take a step back and I'm like, is it sexism here? Is it racism here? Is it anti-Semitism? Is it a little of this? It's a little of that, right? You're like, what's coming? What's the issue for the person or the community that I'm dealing with? But from my perspective, and I guess that's really it, trying to figure out what's the issue for the people. I was recently, I was in a place where following the male rabbi who had been there, I was the first, obviously the first female rabbi, because the other rabbi had been there for decades. And, they were used to us male leadership. They were expecting dominance. They were expecting authority. And that's just not how I operate. I want everyone around the table and what do you think? What do you think? And let's co-create and we'll figure it out. And that was not successful there because that's not what they were looking for. And so I noticed those, instances like that. I noticed also in that same place, the biggest challenges to my authority, the times when I would exercise authority, and it's not even I'm not a forceful person, it's always coming from a place of love and hopefully mutual connection and understanding. But the biggest pushback I got would be from the women in the congregation, and it was quite unfortunate. It'd be if I said let's go left, they'd all say no, we want to go right. So if I said okay, fine, let's go right, then they would say no, we want to go left. So that was quite disappointing. And also relatedly, being a mother was Galia. Remember, we talked about kavod. Being a mother was a challenge in that way also, because in places that we're used to, I'm thinking of one particular place, in a place that's used to having, a male rabbi with no, kids hanging off of them or whatever, that's what they expected. And they were hoping that they could, I'm not saying this was a conscious thought of them by any means, but they wanted to hire the rabbi and they expected that I would leave the mother part of me at home, right? But there's no way to do that. And in that same place, they wanted to hire the rabbi. They didn't want to hire the Black woman. They just wanted the rabbi. And it's like, you know, we talk about the intersection, like there's no way to separate these things out. Like this is who you get. And it comes with my awareness of what it means to be in a city that's half Black. It comes with an awareness of recognizing the gifts that we have that we need to share and seeing the inequity in our worlds. And that also comes from being a Jewishly learned human being and understanding what our tradition is calling us to do. So those have been my experiences, like, and it's hard for me to always tease out, you know, what's at play, but, you know, hopefully those are some instances where I've been clearly able to do that.
Sure, thank you. I might also point out that I just found it very sweet how you turned to your daughter, and you could have used an English word, right? But your daughter understands the concept of kavod and what that means, and that's precious and a wonderful insight into how you bring Judaism into your home and into your family. So I appreciate that.
I just want to say I can't take credit for that. I told her before, I said, this is a meeting, I can't be interrupted, and people are expected to listen to that. And, you know, I need to focus. And she said, oh, like, I need to give kavod. And I was like, yes.
Okay, good for her. Good for her. So, Rabbi Deborah, I should ask you just to expand on, from your perspective, what are some things that perhaps some experiences that you have had where the intersection maybe has gone smoothly, but maybe not quite so smoothly. It's hard to compartmentalize ourselves, right? We are who we are. And people might just want to hire a rabbi, but no, all of me comes to you. And I'm not going to separate things out. And then also, what are some ways that we could do better in terms of being more aware of, our relationships with people of color? And please unmute.
I echo with everything that Rabbi Tiferet said. I have, and I tend to do it where, okay, almost as a prerequisite, okay, so they're only going to want to see this or whatever group I'm in. So if the science people, they don't want to see the rabbi and the, or the Reiki master or anything else. They want to see the science, Deborah. They don't necessarily want to hear about the, I have to be aware of the congregation at the time. How much do you bring in related, politically tinged, but socially relevant activities that really have an impact in African-American community, such as any of the mass shootings that have gone on recently, or Juneteenth coming up next month. Those types of things. It's almost, there is a little bit of a dance there. And maybe because some of my experiences, I feel like, all right, I need to be aware that not everybody's running at full-fledged Deborah speed, in terms of not everybody has all of these antennas up for what's going on in the African-American community, the Jewish community, the spiritual community, the scientific community. How can I bring awareness of all of my parts in at a level where people can understand where I'm coming from? Because in my mind, it's already there. So that's things on one side. I haven't had a lot of experience as a rabbi where I have been where I've had to marginalize where someone's required me to marginalize one part of me or another. The first wedding that I did as a rabbi was actually from one of my science customers at AOAC International, who left me a voice message on the work phone saying, "Hey, Deb, I have a question for you. Can you call me?" And I had known him for years. And when we spoke, he was like, I I would like for you to consider officiating my wedding. And I was just completely floored by this because I have Rav on my signature for my work with the AOAC, but it's nothing that I'm overly going into. But he actually to me it seemed as if it was out of the blue, asked me to officiate his wedding, and I was like, wow, what a wonderful way to kind of bridge both of those worlds for me. And he tells everybody about it whenever we go to meetings and so forth. What we can do better, I would like for us to be cognizant of the labels we use. When I look at the general Jewish population, mostly of Euro descent, I don't say white Jew. I see Jew as Jews. And so what I think one of the things that we all can do to help improve relations, improve an understanding is to drop the titles, or at least be aware of what those titles may mean. Because and certainly we all use them, and some of them are habitual by everyone. But when I look at, for instance, when I look at my friends that I went to school with, I consider them Jews. I would hope that they don't consider me a Black Jew, that I'm just a Jew, like they are. We all have common goals. We're almost in this for the same reasons, so to speak. We may come from different communities, different challenges. We may have different intersections to bring to the broader Tikkun Olam discussion, but my pigmentation should not be the adjective that should stand out. And I think because it does, as well as it's good to acknowledge that there are Jews of color, and there are, as a broader overall Jewish community, by default, coming out of Egypt, we were a mixed multitude. There's no need for that. There's no need to try to separate, to distinguish such that it comes up to be a separation. One of the things Rabbi Tiferet mentioned was, the idea of being considered white. That's something. This is something on the African American side as well. I would say, we've got to be aware of the vocabulary we use, and again, it may be instilled in us, but these do have meanings, and they do have impact. And if we're ever going to be able to have and improve relations, one of the things we have to do is make sure that our language does not create additional barriers.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you. And to Rabbi Tiferet.
Thank you. Yeah, I think thank you for sharing that. And I love that I love that we have this forum, because I feel the complete opposite. Right? And what do they say? Like 2 Jews, 3 opinions, right? Like
exactly.
That's the way it is. And like I feel like, and like I it's interesting because we think about like our positionality and like what's important for us, where we're coming from. And like, I feel that way. I feel like I don't feel the complete opposite. I feel like, I hear what you're saying, and I feel that as well. And I'm like, can't you just see me as a Jewish person? Like that's the be all end all. And at the same time, when someone comes to say, well, I'm colorblind, I don't see race. And it's like, well, then you don't see your privilege and my oppression. And then I feel like you're trying to certainly not like intentionally, like, no, I'm not sending blame, but like, then you don't see my experience, right? And we're living here in America none of us signed up for this system of race, right? Like none of us said, please class me X, Y, and Z. That's just the way it is. So I feel that it's really important for Jews who are classed as white to grapple with that, because Jews who have been classed as white, a lot of them, like you said, are Ashkenazi, are coming from Eastern Europe, where Jews were classed as Jews at the bottom of the ladder. Then to come to America at the top of the ladder is very dangerous when people who are now in a privileged class still hold on to the victim class mentality and do damage. And I think that does damage. And I think that's one of the questions we were discussing at some point about, like, how do we improve relations with, Blacks and Jews and whatever. And I think being aware of the fact that a lot of Black people, or not Jewish Black people, see Jews as white people, right? So when Jews are like, oh, I'm Jewish, and like, I get it, they're like, no, you don't, you're white. So understanding that not everyone's aware of that history that we know, that like so many, like everywhere, like Jews are Jews everywhere in the world, right? At the bottom of the ladder. It's in America. This is a new experience. And understanding the system of race in America, I think, is paramount for Jews. At the same time, being able to understand that we're all Jews, but we're not all having the same experience as Jews in this country.
And I completely, I do not disagree with you at all on any of that. I do think the language is important, because not all Jews of color are monolithic either. Even across African-American Jews, they're not all alike. But at the same time, Jews from Korea, we wouldn't refer to them racially. We refer to their contribution to Judaism culturally. And so I would like to, or ethnically. And so I would like to have a broader focus on the collective contributions culturally and ethnically the Jews of all hues bring to the table. And then for those, and you make a very great distinction about the Black community, because that goes beyond Jews of color or Black Jews, however we define it. That's the broader community. And there is a level there that, there are steps in this, there are phases, because there are those who are Jews, there are those who are not Jews. And then you're looking at not only how do Jews improve relations with these communities, but you have to take them where they're at. There's differences in faith. There's differences, and there are other differences than just looking at Jews of color. These Jews of color have the faith aspect in common, ideally. But when you're talking about the broader Black community, there's still a lot of other aspects that need to be considered in where Black people are coming from, where Jews are coming from. And certainly on both sides, the African-American community has a lot to gain by doing the same thing, understanding not all Jews are the same and monolithic, and overcoming some of the stereotypes there as well.
Sure, thank you both. We have, let's face it, we have come rather far, but we have so much farther to go. And
yes.
Of course, in the, we're made b'Tselem Elohim, right? We're made in the image of God. And at some point in time, it's certainly our prayer that we all look at each other and see the face of God, whatever hue that is, but it's us, right? And there's God in each and every one of us. I want to, it looks like it's 1:55. Can I find out how many more minutes we have for our program?
I would say, Rabbi, later that Yehudit will answer. Would she unmute herself, please?
Yes, I just did. This is such an engaging discussion and provoking. So I kind of feel like we could go on. So how about we set till 1 o'clock if we go, I mean 2 o'clock. If we go a little longer, a few more minutes, by all means. Is there perhaps questions from the audience? I know, Rabbi Leder, you picked some of them. Randy, were you monitoring any questions or that you would like to ask at this time?
I think everything was covered.
I have a question.
Yeah. Is that-
Please.
Hi, ladies. It's Anita Blanchet from Canada. How are you?
Hey.
Okay, glad to join you once again from Namat, Canada. I have actually two questions. Number one, I asked and nobody answered it. If you've had any interaction with any of our rabbis in Canada, do you hold a pulpit now? Do you have any interaction with our rabbis from Canada? I'm from Montreal, which is quite an Orthodox community, if you know Montreal at all. And we have a very, very large membership of Ethiopian Jews here that are very observant. It's very interesting. So the Jews that came out of Ethiopia, many are in Israel, an awful lot have come to Montreal, Canada. So we have that situation also. So if you have those answers, I'll be very happy. Thank you.
Deborah or Rabbi Tiferet, have you had any connections with our Canadian counterparts?
I have, but the rabbi that I am familiar with is in Winnipeg, Manitoba. His name is Rabbi Anibal Mas, and he's actually the rabbi at Congregation Shaarei Tzedek.
Great, thank you. And Rabbi Tiferet?
Two things. I notice language a lot. Also, I think it's because we're rabbis, like we're in the language. And I noticed that the person who was asking the question was talking about the religiosity of the Ethiopian community and said it's interesting. And that ties into my experience of people always assuming that I'm a Reformed Jew. And so I just wonder how we notice the assumption that people that Jewish communities that we may be unfamiliar with, or Jews whose experience may be different than ours, they won't be less religious than we are, or that it's not a shock that they are more religious or that they practice differently, because that's an assumption. And to notice that assumption is a part of how we get to that place. I saw Selma asked a great question. How do we get to post our skin color? By checking our assumptions, right? Based on our skin color that we all make, because that's how our brains work, right? That's how it is. But becoming aware and noticing those things. And I know Rabbi Julia Appel, who is in Toronto, and she's wonderful. She's a Canadian. I also know, I don't think he finished rabbinical school. Never mind, he's a student. But so those are that's the rabbi that I, and Josh Korber, Rabbi Josh Korber. And I'm not sure, I think he's more further west in Canada. But we did not go to school together. We learned together in Israel, which is like a dear time in my heart. But Rabbi Julia and I got to learn together at Hebrew College, so we had a lot of time together.
Thank you. So Rabbi Tiferet, you brought up people making assumptions about your being a Reformed Jew. I think I know one of the questions that I had on my list. So Rabbi Deborah, can you tell us about Jewish Universalism?
You're muted.
Me and the mute button today. So Jewish Universalism was actually founded by Rabbi Stephen Blaine in the late 1990s, early 2000s. And it's a way it was developed because there was this observation that there were a large number of unaffiliated Jews. And a lot of Jews were unaffiliated specifically because of interfaith relationships, and so it became a home. Certainly, it's all, Sim Shalom is the home for Jewish Universalism, but it's really about looking at, there are multiple paths to Judaism and multiple roots of divinity to Hashem, and they are all holy. And we tend to think of the standard Orthodox conservative reform, Reconstructionist, and go on and on. But it's really, Jewish Universalism is a movement. It's not a denomination. And therefore, everyone is welcome. And in fact, it's designed that way so that we're not looking at putting restrictions on being able to participate, being engaged in Judaism and being engaged with community. And so we embrace the reality of Jewish interfaith families without restrictions, requirements, or expectations.
Linda?
A great nutshell. And Rabbi Tiferet, your ordination is from Hebrew College, which is not affiliated with any of the denominational movement seminaries. So could you talk a little bit about how your learning prepared you to serve the Jewish community?
Yeah, I knew that I didn't want to have to squish myself into any denominational box to become a rabbi. Like, I didn't want to have to, toe any particular party line or adhere to any particular dogma. I'm just Jewish. And I considered going to JTS because, I was very much in the conservative movement, and I actually had a racist encounter while I was there. So I was like, yeah, no, this is not for me. And so then I discovered Hebrew College, which is wonderful, in the work of Art Green. And I was like, this speaks to my soul. This I can do. And the education was a deeply traditional education, a lot of text study, and how we go into the word to bring the meaning out into the times that we're living in, and how we both understand the context and we make it meaningful for us now. So it's funny because my training is so traditional and like yeshiva style, and that doesn't line up with the job of being a rabbi, because most people aren't like, rabbi, will you help me understand this page of Talmud? It's more like, rabbi, I need a funeral, rabbi, I need a wedding. So it's very interesting figuring out how to translate all of the Torah learning into Jewish living for members in our congregations.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Linda Schomburg, you have a question.
Yeah.
Yes. This is for Rabbi Deborah. So I got to level 1 in Reiki, and because you are fortunate enough to have an online audience, I wonder if you ever address people's issues, mindfulness, whatever, in part of your service by telling people all they have to do is sit there, or if they wish to lie down, put their hands in the appropriate place, and you say these soothing words that are beneficial.
Well, thank you for that question, Linda. Actually, I don't necessarily do it that way. What I do is as part, instead of the traditional hoda'ah that we normally say during our services, where the chazan says reads one part and the congregation chants, says the other part. What I do is transform the hoda'ah into I'll read it out loud, but I will invite everyone to take a moment to be present in their journey and set aside all of those things that draw our attention during the day, all of those things that really, just weigh on us, set those aside and take a moment to recognize and acknowledge all of those precious points of lights and blessings in your lives. And then I invite people to share that while I read the Hoda aloud. And then we come after and we share at least one item for which everyone is thankful. And it's healing.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rabbi. Selma?
I have, this might be a final question. I was curious. I have noticed since when I started my learning in the fields of Judaism, that the attitudes towards women have changed, because when I was at the Jewish Theological Seminary, there were no possibilities for rabbinical school for women at that time. And I must say that I've watched that transformation happen. But I'm also curious as to whether at this point you're noticing changes so that your next generation of women of different views are going to be in a different situation than you were in. Are your children facing some of the challenges that you once had to experience? And both of you can unmute, Tiferet and Deborah, Rabbi, both rabbis, please feel free to jump in.
I'll jump in and say, I am amazed at the education that my kid is getting. She goes to our local Jewish day school, and I am talking about you, honey. I'm amazed, and not just her, like all of the kids. I had the pleasure of working with some of the 8th graders, and they said, we need a rabbi to help answer some of their ethical questions. And one of the questions was what does halakha say about discriminating against African American people based on their hair? And someone else was asking about, what does halakha say about, drugs and, all of these things that in our day, or I should say in my day, no, we weren't talking about this kind of stuff, and so I trust that now she's getting this much more aware education. She and her schoolmates are being taught to be conscious of who they are and who's at the table with them, who's in the room with them, who's not, their positionality. I mean, the 6th grader was saying, she was like, I recognize my positionality as a white Jewish person and blah, blah, blah. I was like, oh my God, I'm talking to grown-ups trying to say, you have to understand your positionality, and the 6th graders, they got it. And I think kids get things so much faster. We're older, we're set in our ways. It's harder to change us, right? We've been doing things. I mean, it's not that it's not possible, right? But we come with assumptions, we come with biases, and but with the kids, it's they don't have all of that. So our teachers these days are doing such a great job of using that fertile soil to cut those assumptions off, to help teach them how to check their biases right away. So I am feeling so hopeful for her education, and she's just in pre-K there. So I'm by the time she's in 8th grade, it's going to be oh my God.
And I'll answer it from a different standpoint. What I have been observing is an increase in the number of conversions, and how those conversions are following similar to Rabbi Teferet's pathway, where they know they want to do more, where they know they want to be in leadership, whether it's lay or actually, become a rabbi or become a cantor. And it's amazing, just how they've come into it, and actually how they're addressing some of the challenges, from either family or friends who have kind of watched them go through the transition of, converting into a Jewish life, and their excitement about taking it further and doing more and being active and wanting to be. active in community and in leadership in community.
Thank you. It was really reassured my faith in education. I'm an educator, and listening to Rabbi Tiferet and to you, that's where the changes can occur, and we hope that education will do that. You change the labels and the attitudes, and I'm an optimist, so I do believe strongly in education and in forums like this and getting to know people and seeing all of us as one people. So with this, I extend my thanks, but I want to ask Selma to please conclude our very interesting, thought-provoking afternoon.
And before I totally conclude, Randy Sable, who had a little difficulty today getting in at times, but Randy, were there any other things you wanted to share, because you worked hard in preparing the program as well?
No, I think we covered in some way, shape, or form. I think we covered all of our questions. I know Linda Schoenberg had wanted to know something a little bit more about the Reiki to Rabbi Deborah. Linda, did you want to say anything more?
I actually did get to ask that question, but what I was going to type into the chat was everybody has to go to Israel, because Israel covers the span from every shade of the universe, and it is beautiful.
So in conclusion, I want to thank our wonderful speakers today, Rabbi Enid Lader, Rabbi Deborah Mckenzie, and Rabbi Tiferet Birnbaum. All three of you enriched us greatly today, taught us so much. You know that Na'amat is all about helping women and enriching their lives, and you are all examples of that. Golda Meir once said, "Make the most of yourself," and you three have, by fanning the inner sparks of possibility. And what you taught us today is that it's possible. I want to say that I have always been taught Am Echad, Lev Echad. We are one people, one heart. We must join forces and work together. Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Bazeh. We are all responsible for each other. And one last thing. I know I met you women at Sinai. You were there. Thank you so much for joining us at this Na'amat event.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Terrific program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so
Thank
much,
you.
rabbis.
These women made it terrific.
Absolutely.
We'll have you again, I'm sure. We loved it. We loved it.
We all loved it.
Yes, it's what we're about. Myra, do you want to stay on? Myra Birnbaum, do you want to stay on, or should Myra Birnbaum, who I will make on the screen right now. I just learned how to do this. Myra is the grandmother of the little girl who you heard in the background, whose name, Myra, is what?
Talia.
Maya.
Galia.
Dalia.
Talia.
Gee, Lamed, you're
Galia, my hearing. Galia. Maybe Galia could come on and say hi to herself, to her grandmother. If you have, do you
interest?
Let us see that beautiful punim.
Hi there.
Hi, Galia.
She come on.
You are our future. You are our future.
And she knows it.
Yes.
All right, I'll talk to you later. Bye, everybody. It was wonderful.
Bye.
Bye.
Hi, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Shalom. Bye.
Shalom. Shalom. Yeshikot. Shalom.
And thank you, Melanie, too. I didn't.
Melanie Cutnick. Thank you.
Thank you.
I see her.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
She's wow.
All right. Thank you, Rabbi Tiferet. Thank you
My
so much.
pleasure. Oh,
I
my
get to Brookline. I'm going to be in Brookline. I know for sure in December, and I was there